Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hi, I'm Mark Swartz. I'm the Executive Director of Law Center for Better Housing, or LCBH. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. In total, we have more than 350 attendees in person and via Zoom, including many city, county, and state officials. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Chicago's first Chief Homelessness Officer, Cindy Soto. We're so grateful that you're here and in a position of leadership to coordinate resources to assist individuals and families facing homelessness. And I'd also like to point out that Christine Haley, who is signed up, hopefully she's on virtually, is the state homelessness chief. And just to acknowledge the governor and the mayor for, really prioritizing this issue and making those appointments. So thank you. This morning, our moderator and panelists will discuss the vital importance of legal aid and court-based rental assistance for renters in eviction court. Each of them brings a thoughtful perspective to a topic we care deeply about, making eviction court more equitable. The Law Center for Better Housing has served Chicago's low and moderate income renters for more than 40 years. In 2019, we developed an online eviction data portal to track more than a decade's worth of eviction court data. And it's for public use, it's online, and later this summer we're going to add an additional, 2 to 3 years, so I hope you'll join us once we do another data portal release. From 2010 to 2019, Chicago averaged more than 22,000 eviction filings per year. LCBH also found stark disparities in where these evictions were filed. Majority black areas have eviction filing rates 5 times higher than majority white areas, while rates in majority Latinx areas are twice as high as those in majority white areas. Today, eviction filing rates have returned to their pre-pandemic levels. However, many of the resources that were made available during the pandemic to avoid the avalanche of evictions that everybody was worried would take place are still present and with us. And we're here today to talk about these strategies and how they're impacting renters, landlords, and people within our communities. Before 2020, when a renter entered eviction court, they had as little as 7 days between receiving their eviction summons and going to trial. In cases where a renter could obtain counsel, by finding people at LCBH or our partners at Legal Aid Chicago, they wouldn't have any way of connecting to rental assistance. There was no such thing as court-based rental assistance that people could connect to resolve their case before it went to an eviction judgment. The COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated problems inherent in the eviction process, shedding light on what LCBH and our allies have known for decades. Without efficient access to resources inside eviction court, many families become homeless. In 2020, Cook County government and the Circuit Court of Cook County, in partnership with the Chicago Bar Foundation and local legal aid agencies, transformed the structure of eviction court by creating the Early Resolution Program, or ERP. And thanks to CBF for being here in full. ERP provides all unrepresented tenants access to legal advice, limited scope legal assistance, and connections to other resources, like rental assistance, to help negotiate early resolutions when possible. Recent changes in the law in Chicago and now in Cook County also allow for a one-time right to cure, ensuring that renters can use funds through the court-based rental assistance to pay their landlord's rent owed even after the eviction's filed and the eviction has to be dismissed. In July of 2022, the Chicago Department of Housing chose LCBH to lead its Right to Counsel pilot project. This is a 3-year initiative and builds on the ERP to provide extended representation to eligible tenants who are unable to resolve their cases in the Early Resolution Program. As you'll hear today, the combination of legal aid and rental assistance inside Chicago's eviction courts levels the playing field for renters, keeps more families stably housed, and more money in the hands of landlords, a trend that isn't just evident in Chicago, but across the country in jurisdictions that have adopted similar court diversion programs. At this time, I'd like to pass the mic over to our moderator, Marisa Navarra, whom I have had the privilege of working with on the Right to Counsel pilot when she was the commissioner of the City of Chicago Department of Housing. Today, Marisa serves as the Vice President of Community Impact at the Chicago Community Trust, who's hosting us today, and thank you to the Trust for that, where she oversees the development and implementation of the Trust's strategic initiatives, its policy agenda, and grant making to reduce the racial and ethnic wealth gap in the Chicago region. We are so grateful for Marisa's career-long commitment to providing individuals and families access to stable, healthy, and secure housing. And thank you all for being here today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction, and thanks to the Law Center for pulling this amazing event together. And I think the interest both here in the room and across the country is really representative of the importance of the topic. I'm really happy to be revisiting this subject from a different seat, and I wanted to just share a couple thoughts looking back on my previous role, and then we'll turn to this great group of panelists. We are down a panelist who is en route and may get here in time to join the panel and may not, it sounds like. So we'll play that by ear. The weather gods were not in our favor, or his favor this morning. So as Mark mentioned, I was Commissioner of Housing from 2019 to 2023. And I was in that role, of course, when the COVID pandemic began. And, there were, of course, a lot of fears in those early months about what it would mean because of all the job loss that was taking place, what it would mean. And I think that was when I first heard this term, like a tsunami of evictions, right, was being speculated about. And then the governor established a moratorium on evictions, and the city and then the state set up emergency rental assistance, and everyone breathed a little bit easier for a bit. And then that moratorium was extended, and in the meantime, we were able to set up some support systems that didn't exist before. I think one of the things, my reflection on that period of time, was that crises like that, in the silver lining of them, is that it can give you the space to roll out, to try something you've long known was needed, but maybe there wasn't the political will to access or the money to really galvanize around it. And then we suddenly had a fair amount of federal resources that we could finally say, well, if we wanted a more responsive system that actually could respond to people's needs throughout all the changes that occur in their lives and help people stay stably housed, what might we do, right? So we, along with the state, set up a system. We ended up assisting about 30,000 households with rental assistance so that they could stay stably housed. So of course that's households, so that's untold more individuals that were actually able to stay housed. And then, as Mark mentioned, one of the things that I'm super proud of is that we were able to roll out a pilot for Right to Counsel, which we had long been interested in doing, but just wasn't in the cards until suddenly we were able to pull some of the federal dollars towards setting up a pilot with the Law Center and others. And of course now Mayor Johnson has introduced a bill to, hopefully make that permanent. So that's the kind of forward movement that we would love to see continue on this topic, and continue to learn and grow together as we work on it. So I would like to turn now to this panel. When we sat down to talk, and Michelle and I, of course, worked together when I was at the city, but for others, I was really impressed with the level of commitment and knowledge and learnings that they bring to this topic. So let me ask each of you just to share your name and if you have an organization, what that is, and what's your connection to this topic. So let's start with you, Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Gilbert, and I'm the Law and Policy Director at the Law Center for Better Housing. And I try to keep the Right to Counsel pilot project moving every day.
Good morning. My name is William Dalton. I am a third grade special education teacher, but I am a tenant that used my right to cure. I'm very appreciative of the organization, and I'm here to give my output on and how great the program was for me.
Morning, everybody. I'm Peter Selke. I'm the director of the Strategic Response Department at the Illinois Housing Development Authority, also known as IDA. I've helped launch emergency rental and mortgage assistance programs since 2020 in partnership with legal aid organizations, housing agencies. Since 2020, we've assisted 150,000 renter households, totaling $1.15 billion in assistance. IDA's mission is to finance the creation and preservation of affordable housing. Of note, we have one of the largest down payment assistance programs in the country, so I encourage you to visit ihda.org to learn about that. We also support a database of rental units, including affordable and accessible rental units throughout Illinois. It's called ilhousingsearch.org.
Great, thank you so much. My first question, I think I'll start with Michelle and Peter, which is just to kind of walk us through what are the changes that you've seen in eviction court proceedings since the pandemic started? How's the landscape different now, and what's your role in that?
Well, Mark talked a lot about the change in adding the time, which is really important because, again, people were often evicted, got an eviction order against them on that very first court date, where they may have gotten as little as 7 days notice. So we have the structural changes with the time, and then we have the resource changes, where we have attorneys in the early resolution program, anyone who comes to court, and that's our big message. If someone has eviction court, they don't need to email me, or they just need to go to court, and we will help them. They have access to resources, both legal aid and to help connect them to the court-based rental assistance. I would say overall, the big change is, I think that because of the pandemic, people just are aware of the downside of eviction a lot more. Before the pandemic, eviction was something that happened to other people. And I think that we all realize that we're all at risk of eviction when something really dramatic like the pandemic happens. And I think that has brought a lot more attention to the issue.
Thanks, Michelle. I want to talk a little bit about the court-based rental assistance program known as CBRAP, which is an active program right now. It's available statewide. So it's for tenants who are in the eviction process. They've received a summons due to an eviction filing due to past due rent payments. We opened this program in October 2022, and we've assisted about 10,000 households throughout the state to date, totaling about $74 million in assistance. Last year, we added City of Chicago as well as Suburban Cook to the program, so it's now a statewide program which offers up to $10,000 or up to 18 months of rental assistance, which can include up to 2 months of future assistance. We also pay for up to $500 in court costs, which is part of that $10,000 cap. Again, the goal of this program is to get an eviction case dismissed. The landlord is required to do that as a requirement of participating in the program. We also know that this is an essential component of the Home Illinois plan to prevent and end homelessness. This is the state's 2-year plan focusing on building state and community infrastructure to end homelessness. So I encourage you to Google Home Illinois to learn more about that. We also target underserved populations in communities with this program. 64% of our approved households are Black or African American. 83% earn less than 30% of area median income. There are some income limits that apply, but they're generally fairly high. It's $88,000 for a family of 4 in Cook County. A lease is not required to apply. And in order for a landlord or a tenant to start the joint application process, they could go to illinoishousinghelp.org.
Thank you. I want to ask you a question, Dalton, but I have to confess first, I'm geeking out a little bit because the right to cure was part of the very first law that I changed when I was Daniel Hertz and I. This was the first thing that we ever did in 2020, and I have never yet met someone who said I used that and it helped me. So this is like a moment. No, it's just really cool. And so tell us a little more about that. Tell us more about your experience, and what do we need to learn from how this has worked in your life?
Yes, well, it started off, I had a 4 or 5 month of a lot of hits to my life. My dad had a heart attack and he had bypass surgery. I got laid off from my previous job as a dean of a high school. I totaled my truck and then my mom died. So it was a lot of like personal issues, and then that caused me my financial hit to my financial. So I became behind on rent. I have very, very good landlords, but after giving me grace after so many months, they like, hey, this is a business and we got to keep this running. So when I had found out they had filed for eviction, I was familiar with the court-based rental assistance program. So I immediately applied for it. Very smooth process of application-wise. And then I was given a court date because I was served. I went there. They was like, you just hold here. We're going to put you in a separate room so you can, for right to cure. So we can put you with the organization so, things can proceed in that the ERAP, right?
Emergency Rental Assistance Program.
Yes. So when I got with the person in the Zoom room, I was to let them know that I was already a lengthy way already through the application process. So they was like, okay, cool. An attorney will contact you soon. And within maybe like 5 to 6 days, I had an attorney email me and walk me through step by step through the process to get my case dismissed and get everything paid up to what I need to get paid up to. And being behind a rent, it does a lot emotionally to you. And I'm a teacher, so I just want to be able to give myself fully to the children at school. It was a quick process. We got everything done. My landlords are cool and satisfied. I'm back on track, paying everything on time. Life is much better. I thank you all. This program helped a lot tremendously. And now, especially me being one of the pillars in my family now with my mom passing and things of that nature, it's just put me in a better space mentally to be out here and just, contribute to society in my community.
Thank you for sharing that story. And so you're saying you were able to stay in your original apartment?
Yes, I was able to stay.
Which is awesome. And in some cases, we talked about this, right? That's not always the outcome. But regardless, it seems.
Yes, and I have a 4-year-old daughter as well that I take care of as well. So that's big for her. And my daughter was a home birth. So the apartment, the place that I live now is where she was physically born. So it was very important for me to stay there at this point in time.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna jump back to something Mark talked about in his opening remarks. He talked about the disparities in Chicago eviction filings. So for Peter, what have you learned in this process about renters and landlords, and are they reaching the people who need to reach them the most? And also maybe just some stories of real, experiences, because I think in many cases we have ideas about, you hear stereotypes about tenants who can't pay rent, and you hear stereotypes about landlords who are, all greedy bums, right? And in lots of cases, there's way more nuance than that. And so it just give a little color, I guess, to the experience of like what are people going through, and how has this worked?
All right, good question. So the program is really centered at helping both the tenants as well as the landlords or housing providers. This is not a solution for just one of those parties. We really want to help both parties in unique ways. We think the program that we run, the court-based rental assistance program, works better when the landlord is engaged and they're willing to participate. It makes things a lot smoother for all parties involved. We do make outreach attempts to try to get them to participate. Most landlords participate in our program, so that's really great news. And we've actually served a lot of mom and pop landlords in this program. we've had 1,800 approved applications where it's the landlord's single application. So a lot of small landlords. We do have some larger landlords, which is promising too. One of the largest landlords in the city and the state actively participates in this program, and we engage with them at IDA. We talk with them, we answer questions, we tell them about responsibilities, which is really, really encouraging. And there's a lot of obviously positive impact for tenants who receive this assistance. Again, the landlord is required to drop the eviction suit, which means the tenant is not dealing with an eviction filing or an eviction order on their record, which limits them from being able to get a future apartments because landlords will avoid renting to tenants with that in their history. It also helps pay past due rent. Dalton said this could be a temporary blip. It could be a loss of income. Most of our tenants are unemployed, 77% in fact. So it helps them get back on track or potentially even have a graceful exit of the unit. Maybe they need a more affordable housing situation long term. We also support small landlords to recoup unpaid rental income. We understand that taxes are going up, insurance is going up, they have expenses that they need to pay. Our assistance, averages about $9,000 in Cook County and $7,000 across the state, which is 8 or 9 months of assistance. That's a big chunk of change. So it's really important. That's enticing. And there's also pressure in the courts as well as from the legal aids to get that landlord to participate. And it's really hard for a judge to not allow the landlord to participate when the tenant's in the room with the judge in front of them saying, this assistance can reinstate me fully and I could stay in this apartment.
Great. One of the things I'd like to kick this to you, Michelle, is we've talked a lot about the importance of court-based rental assistance, and given Chicago's extreme need for more affordable housing, this really isn't surprising, but it doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. Can you talk to us a little bit about, we know that at its simplest terms, eviction can be just about unpaid rent, but what else is it about that we don't understand as much?
I think that's a really good point because we did really want to emphasize today I think of this three-legged stool of pay to stay, legal aid, and court-based rental assistance as preventing evictions. But our Right to Counsel project is doing a lot of different sort of cases, not just non-payment. We have the issue of tenants getting no cause notices. One of the pieces of the legislation that enacted pay to stay also enacted a 120-day notice. So that gives long-term tenants a little bit more time to move, but we still see them coming into court. We'd love to see even more changes that make it more difficult to evict long-term tenants. We see actually a lot of intra-family evictions, and this goes to the issue of someone passing, not really having the title to the property in proper legal form, or having made sort of a side deal or sort of an oral agreement as to who's going to remain in the property. And those were cases that we could not take in 2019 before we had Right to Counsel and the large increase in our number of attorneys. And then, of course, we're a law center for better housing. I couldn't answer this question without talking about conditions problems. Because we see a lot of people come in with conditions problems, unfortunately have not followed, maybe haven't followed the ordinance, maybe haven't followed it properly, and just withheld too much. We can work with them with a court-based rental assistance, but also defend that eviction. Or if the conditions are so bad, as Peter said, some people just want to move, and we can work out a graceful exit so that they're not being removed from the property really with only, a few weeks' notice.
Right. I think that's an important point, is that for some people, like Dalton, the best resolution is to catch up and stay. And for others, the best resolution may be to go, but how do we help people go so that they have the best chance of landing on their feet? and their family recovering and being resilient from that move. Well, I was going to ask this question of our panelist who's not here, so I may hit you with this, Michelle, just for some thoughts on this. I mentioned that Mayor Brandon Johnson has introduced a right to counsel ordinance that would make the pilot permanent and provide access to legal representation for eligible Chicago renters. So what I'm curious about is, from a national perspective, I was going to ask, what do you see in places where we have seen that nationally, where we've seen that be, not a pilot, but a long-term program. But knowing what we already know, which is that it's very expensive to rehouse people. It is expensive for a city and for a state. I'm looking at Cindy and Christine here to address issues of homelessness once they already happen. So can you talk a little bit about, just either of you, really, like, what do we know about already about what this could get us to have a permanent program?
Well, when I start answering this question, I ask people to imagine if you're going to move and the kinds of things that you do. If you have kids, you look into the schools, the analysis that you make, and imagine if you had to do all of that in 1 month. And that's when people get evicted, they lose their possessions, they literally financial hit immediately, because they just can't move everything and possessions just get thrown away. So, we have in the supportive housing world, there's a program called rapid rehousing, which is great when there are homeless people who need to be rehoused. But, and this should go on my tombstone. How about they don't become homeless first? How about we keep them in that housing? And I wish Neil will be here, and Stout has done so much economic analysis, and I'm not the person to explain economic analysis, but he can explain how actually keeping people housed, having right to counsel, having people not being evicted actually can have a cost savings for the jurisdiction. One thing I'm excited about, and I'm gonna call it the Chicago model, no ketchup on this model, right? Where there are other places that have enacted right to counsel, where there are attorneys in the courtrooms, but without making the structural changes that were made in Chicago. And I'm talking about the change in the court that required the cooperation of the courts. And, the Bar Foundation can do that, where one set of attorneys from one side can't have that same sort of access. So we needed the changes in the court, we needed some changes in the ordinance, and we needed DOH, we needed IDA to have the court-based rental assistance so that we could accomplish all of these things.
Anything you would add, Peter?
I just kept on thinking about the cost for a tenant who's been living in their apartment to find a new apartment and to transfer. There's a lot of moving fees and buying new furniture and supplies, and rents are just increasing more and more throughout the city and the state. And I think Illinois does a really good job, in Chicago as well, of building new affordable housing units and preserving affordable housing units. But the reality is the cost to build these units are $400,000 or $500,000 a piece. So there's a finite amount of resources that are available for affordable housing. Most of our federal funding from COVID is now dwindling. So that just means we have to be more strategic, and we have to align with partners and come up with more unique ways to kind of tackle these issues.
Yeah. So I want to bring you back into this, Dalton, and I feel like this issue, again, silver lining perhaps of the pandemic, was this issue really started to get a lot more attention and a lot more resources than I think it did before. And from your personal perspective, and then Michelle, maybe from your professional perspective, what would you like to see happen next? Let's start with you, Dalton.
For it to not be a pilot program, for sure.
Right.
I also know many friends with many landlords and other tenants who are facing similar situations as far as eviction goes. And once my case was, handled and dismissed, I'm like, hey, go through this process. This is what's going to happen. These are the steps. Everything went smoothly for me. So they're on it as well. So I know about 3 or 4 people who are in the eviction process right now who I told them, like, look, I understand where you are emotionally and mentally, because thinking every day, like, how am I going to get this money? That's a thing. Every 10, 20 minutes is something that you think of going about your regular day. And for this not to be a pilot program is something that is, implemented in the city and statewide in general, I think would be great. And it's just something, as if people get to know more about it, it can bring about more ease into the everyday life. And he's like, okay, I'm covered. This is not something that's a permanent thing, but it's something I can be able to, I can rest assured I'll have a safety net if something comes up in my life or whatever I'm facing at the time, and then I can go about doing what I need to do on everyday life.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, I think an important piece of the making this permanent that shouldn't go without saying is typically in these cases, about 90% of landlords are represented by attorneys and only about 10% of tenants are. So there's a massive mismatch in, just familiarity, ability to push for your rights, get the best outcome, land on your feet with the best, the imbalance there is pretty profound. And that's really what we're trying to address when we establish right to counsel programs. Anything you would add, Michelle?
Well, I would follow up on exactly what you were just saying about the imbalance. I mean, judges are used to hearing things said in a certain way. I mean, any of us kind of turn to someone that we've seen before, maybe, that is speaking our language. It doesn't mean that the courts are set up in a way that's biased. It's just natural. People listen to someone speaking their language, so they're going to listen to the landlord's attorney. There is a perception that tenants don't have defenses, and I can tell you it's because they didn't have attorneys and they weren't articulating those defenses. We get cases dismissed every day, not just about rental assistance, but because the landlord hasn't given proper notices. It's so often we get cases dismissed where the landlord has continued to take the rent, even though that's clearly, you can't take the rent and evict someone. And we file motions to dismiss. And I think, I don't know, I may be partial to the folks that we hire and train and my fellow legal aid attorneys, but I've been told many times, as judges are leaving eviction courts, maybe they're going to a different sort of courtroom, how having legal aid in the courtroom changed their perception of what was happening in eviction. Seeing that it was more complicated, seeing that there were these legal issues, and that, it wasn't just a matter of processing an eviction order. So I'm really proud of that. I did so excited that William said, continue the program. I know that we're making a difference. So, it doesn't mean that everyone has to have an attorney, but it's certainly my goal to increase the number of attorneys. And I can't hand over the microphone without saying that I'm at LCBH and we have a lot of great attorneys, but we couldn't do it without the other legal aid partners, and especially my sister-in-law, Danica Brooks from Legal Aid Chicago is here. And, we're communicating all the time. And I know I'm supposed to stop. No, but the one thing that I want to point out really quickly is one thing the pandemic did was make us adopt technology that if it hadn't been for the pandemic, we would still be walking around, can people do this? And that is one of the great strengths of IDA. For it to work, the court-based rental assistance has to move quickly enough. And there was no question, should we have a portal? Because that's what we needed during the pandemic, right? We needed to have people operate by email. And I might have been someone in 2019 who would say, my clients can't do the portal, they can't do the email. Well, they had to, and they did. And it makes it work faster. So, I mean, the technology, obviously Zoom, because most of eviction court up until the hearings are over Zoom, it makes it much easier for tenants and landlords to appear. You know, sometimes it's challenging. Sometimes I miss being in court. But it allows us to get to way more tenants. And in suburban Cook, you know, I think a lot about Chicago, but as difficult as it was in Chicago, there were few attorneys in suburban Cook. And there's been funding, and because we can do that initial representation over Zoom, we're representing people from throughout what is a very big county.
Okay. We successfully wound her down. All right. Last question is for Peter, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So we're moving past a lot of the COVID-related federal funding, and I know there's a lot of trepidation about what that world is going to look like. Reflections from your perch coming from the state, what do you think you did right that should be included in any future, hopefully, long-term rental assistance that, you know, continues, we hope?
I think Michelle touched on a lot of what I was about to say, but we were able to launch the program relatively quickly in 2020. So we got the money out the door fairly fast during an emergency, which is super important. We also were Illinois was one of the top states in getting this assistance out the door compared to other states and as well as cities throughout the country. So we're really proud of that. It's not just IDA, it's the state doing this and the work of the legal aids and the HUD certified housing counseling agencies, which were partners on this program. And an interesting stat is that most of our applicants have actually applied using a cell phone, which is a big change of pace from what we're used to seeing. So we eliminated a lot of what we saw is some unnecessary documentation requirements, like supporting a hardship. We don't want to read medical letters and stuff like that. So that was one good way of speeding up the process. We don't need to require social security numbers. Proof of citizenship is not required. We rely on attestations through the process. I think at the start we were relatively rigid though in the process. If someone applied and were missing documentation, that could result in a denial. We've come a long way since then to try to, we call it cure the applications, to get all the missing pieces and make sure that the application meets our eligibility criteria. And we've also decreased processing times with every program that we've launched, which is super important.
And there's funds in the state budget for this ongoing.
Yes, exactly. Right? So there's $35 million in the draft state budget. It's still a draft. At IDA, we're anxious to learn more about what the official language is going to be in that budget and what the requirements we have to hold to will be. So we're anxious to find that out. That would be in the next fiscal year budget. So we're hoping we could launch another court-based rental assistance program sometime after July 1st, the start of the fiscal year. But again, we're waiting on a little bit more guidance about what that's going to entail. And I think going forward, we do have some wish list items. We want to continue to solicit feedback on program design from our legal aid partners, Illinois Equal Justice Foundation, which helps us provide a network of legal aids throughout the state outside of Cook County. And I think we want to focus on continued accessibility for landlords as well as tenants, just making this process a lot easier to apply, as well as what Michelle touched on, just making sure that landlords understand what it means to accept assistance. They have responsibilities for accepting this money and dismissing cases. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to stay on the subject. You ended on landlords, so I'll stay on that subject with this audience question. Is there data that shows a difference in the amount of eviction filings based on landlord type, mom and pop versus larger corporations? And if there's a difference, why might that be? It's for anybody.
I know that the eviction data portal doesn't sort landlords one of the issues is that even a mom and pop can have an LLC. So you don't know when you're looking at something is 28W LLC, you don't know if that's just somebody who got some package off the internet and incorporated, or if it's some huge corporation going by an LLC. I mean, I know, anecdotally, I just see everyone from very small landlords to large landlords. One thing, and I'm not sure if we mentioned it or certainly not emphasized it, is that the ERP is available for unrepresented landlords as well. And I would much rather talk to an attorney on the other side. I think that the landlord's attorneys would rather talk with us. It's a process that it helps for the landlord to have talked with an attorney. And so I think being able to access the advice in the ERP, I think does help move the process along.
That's a good point. We did say 90%. That means 10% aren't represented, and it sounds like you're saying it's kind of better for everyone if there's representation across the board. All right, here's another one. The South Shore community neighborhood experiences more eviction filings than other communities in Chicago. Thoughts on why that might be the case, and what can be done specifically for this community of predominantly African American renters?
Well, one thing that I will say about rental assistance is that we have long-term subsidized programs where people only have to pay 30% of their income for rent. And those are expensive programs without a doubt. But that's one place where rental assistance for people who don't have any other subsidy can just interject and help someone who is in a crisis. I think, we look at what causes evictions. We have financial issues, which is where the rental assistance helps. We also have, as I was talking about, the people who get evictions with no notice. And I know that impacts the South Shore community, and there's always the concern. I live in Hyde Park myself, and so I'm very familiar with the concern around Jackson Park as well and the turnover. Definitely we need to do more work on not opposing gentrification. People want resources in their community, right? They would like to have nice stores too, but making sure that when there is gentrification, there isn't displacement. And so, and the city, I know, is working on, of course, I'm not just throwing this back to you on purpose, but the Affordable Requirements Ordinance, when there are developers, making sure that there are units set aside for folks who it's not heavily subsidized, where someone's only paying 30%, but it's below market, where something that's more affordable.
Got it. Okay. I've got a question for Dalton and a question for probably you, Michelle. Dalton, what would you say to someone else experiencing eviction based on what you know now? You've spoken to this a little bit from.
Yes, and I'm privy to a lot of different programs. Not a lot of people are.
Yeah.
So, and that's another thing, speaking on the communities that I come from, we don't know that these type of programs even exist. And someone like myself who is in these type of communities, just being a voice for it and making sure people know that they have these options available. And it's not just a lot of hopelessness out there. It's just a lot of programs that you can apply for, even before eviction as well. The city provides a lot of different avenues and outlets. So just, getting the word out there, like I spoke to earlier, I have a couple of friends, and I definitely told them how easy the process was. Once I got with my attorney, that was probably the easiest step-by-step process. I was step-by-step. Don't worry about this. I need you to provide minimal info. I'll take care of the rest of everything else. And, it was just a load off my back. So I was able to teach and be a daddy, as well as possible. And I know other people have those obligations as well. And, working in education, I know a lot of parents, especially in the communities. I work at KIP out on the west side right now in the Austin neighborhood. A lot of our children are coming from households where the parents got a lot of issues. And if we can minimize those issues at home, then when they come to school, it's a lot least problems that we have to deal with, and then the teaching environment improves as well. So it's a domino effect when we're talking about these programs that can help us out as a community as a whole.
So clearly you've been spreading the word, and I think a big takeaway that we wanted to make sure you all walked out of here with was if you're working with renters in danger of eviction, the big message we want to drive home is that they should go to court. And that may not have been the vibe before, right? It might have been like, it scares me, that freaks me out. I'm going to just stay far away and hope this doesn't go any further. But, well, that, wasn't the best response before. It's really not the best response now, because that's where the resources are. That's where we can get people the most help based on these programs. Okay, this is an important question. Does court-based assistance show up to future landlords when the tenant applies for new housing? Does having gone through this process show up in any way for them when they are applying to a new landlord in a new apartment?
Michelle, I may give this one to you. I believe the answer is no to that. But Michelle, please expand.
Yeah, no, it's a government database. We don't even access it. We contact IDA and say, oh, has this person gotten assistance or something? So a prospective landlord would not be able to check. In most cases, when we've been able to get the court-based rental assistance, we have been able to get the eviction court files sealed. I can't promise that to people. It's something that's in the judge's discretion, but it's something very often, and we are, even if often the landlord will just agree. Sometimes the landlords come into this process thinking, I don't want rental assistance, I just want to get rid of that person, when can she move? And I said she on purpose, right, because we know it's mostly women. And then, like, hey, well, I can get this check for $10,000, and that, or I have the check when I've done a pay to stay. Well, that kind of changes their mind. And, we look at the pay to stay as, and we argue to the courts that it shows the intent of City Council that people should get another chance. It is a one-time right. It's not like everyone, getting evicted every other month. And because of that, we're often able to get the file sealed. And even if it isn't sealed, it just will show that the case was dismissed. It doesn't show why. It doesn't show that the rental assistance was paid.
Okay. The other question is, why are eviction programs not more proactive? Why are participants required to already be in eviction court before they can receive services? One thing I'll just say prior to others answering this is the emergency rental assistance programs don't require that. You can simply say, I'm behind in my rent, or a landlord can say, my tenant's behind in their rent, and you can go through this process prior to going to court. But the right to counsel obviously is based on once you are in that position. So it looks like Peter wants to jump in here. Go ahead.
I think the big answer, the big response to this is that our federal resources are dwindling. We previously had 2 rounds of rental assistance programs that were available statewide. The first program was about $600 million. The second program, a few $100 million. This coming fiscal year, we have our eye on the $35 million state-funded court-based program. So with that, we need to be a little bit more targeted in who we could help with the rental assistance. We previously, with court-based rental assistance, we're at $25,000 cap. We're now down to $10,000. That still helps us, fix a situation that happens for somebody who's struggling, but it's not a long-term solution to pay somebody's rent and keep them housed.
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking to, a pain point close to my heart, which is we don't have enough affordable housing, right? Which is, in many cases, the preceding factor here is people may be paying too much of their income for rent, and now they've gotten behind, or there's some major life event like Dalton described that makes it very hard for the housing they're in, which wasn't affordable enough to begin with, to be sustained. And so that's an underlying thing that, as long as a country we refuse to fund affordable housing as an entitlement, we will continue to be in a state of scarcity, unfortunately, on that front.
Yeah, I also want to mention that in addition to all these great legal services that are available, in the city alone, there's dozens of HUD-certified housing counseling agencies which offer free financial counseling. All these services are free, which is fantastic. I think what you pointed out is that, people have expensive rent, but now prices of everything else have increased. And there's also the fact that home prices are more expensive. So it's harder to purchase a home. So that means more people are staying within their rental units, which is also impacting that rental market and driving up those prices.
All right. I think this is, no, maybe not. How does a defendant in eviction take advantage of right to counsel? What's the scope of services provided? Is it settlement only or also going to trial?
So it's a two-step process. The tenant needs to go to court. And again, if no other message, the message is that the tenant should go to court. They don't even have to remember the acronym ERP. The court and the clerk staff have a lot of training on how this works now, where if there's an unrepresented tenant or landlord, they're offered the opportunity to talk with an attorney. Again, it's all by Zoom. Not everyone does it, but if you just if you hold on, you will get to an attorney who will first provide advice, analyze your situation. I was in ERP on Monday. It's an assessment of whether the person has the ability, to make an offer to do a negotiation. So literally Monday I saw 3 tenants. One, we're probably going to take to right to counsel to represent. One, I think we'll be able to work something out as a negotiation in ERP. And one is in a situation where she's in a unit she can't afford at all, and she really wants to just move. And so she's working something, she's, just basically moving out on her own without needing to negotiate something. So we look at what service the tenant needs. Not everyone is able to access right to counsel. It's a pilot project. We don't have enough attorneys to take all of the cases that we would like to take, which, if you know me, I just want to take them all. And that's, we have grown, our office and Legal Aid Chicago have grown the number of attorneys that we have representing people, and that's just something that I just want to keep up gradually. It's not, we can't say, okay, next year we're going to have 100 right to counsel attorneys, because people need training and we need to have supervisors.
Looks like you're stopping there.
Yeah.
All right, last question. This came in from registration. How can local community organizations get up-to-date information on evictions in our neighborhoods?
The eviction data portal does divide evictions out by community area. That of course is up through 2019. We have, I can end with this little commercial that we are happy to talk with community-based organizations. People can email outreach@lcbh.org, and, we'll go out to talk to communities. Also about renters' rights. Department of Housing does a lot of outreach events. A lot of members of City Council or the General Assembly will sponsor an event in their community where there are different service providers. We attend as many of those, and the other legal aid organizations attend as many of those as we can, so that people can get information. Just the most basic. Honestly, if you go to the Department of Housing website, there's information about right to counsel, about some renters' rights forms. So there are a lot of different ways. The big thing is getting the message out to people that they're out there.
That's right. All right. I would like you to join me in thanking these wonderful panelists. Not just for your time today, which I do thank you for, and thank you to Kip for letting you spend your morning with us, but also for the work that you do every day, day in, day out, to bring this assistance to people who really need it. And again, so I'll just, a repetition, again, if you are working with tenants, please, the big takeaway is your best bet is to go to court or Zoom into court or whatever you get offered, because that's where really the assistance lies for people. So, and if you're in a position to pilot or advocate for a new idea for keeping renters in their homes, I encourage you to connect with the Law Center. They're always open ears. And I appreciate everyone in this room for your attention to this issue and your ongoing work. Thank you.